They found her bleeding in the snow, barely conscious, her arm wrapped around a tiger cub like it was her own child. The world asked, why would a nurse throw herself in front of a knife to protect a wild animal? But the answer didn't come from her. It came from a grainy video. A tiger, still limping from old wounds, leaping between her and the blade, within hours. A boy who hadn't spoken in a year drew their picture, within days. A town that had forgotten how to care stood still. Some call it instinct, some call it survival. But those who were there, they call it a miracle. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments, and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. The Waverly Pines. North Carolina, late November. A cold front sweeps across the Appalachians, snow falling in, slow. Deliberate silence over pine-blanketed hills. The wind had teeth that night. It bit through Clara Bennett's jacket as she stepped off the gravel shoulder of Route 17 and started the short hike into the woods. The weather had turned fast. One moment, just wind. The next, flurries of snow spiraling through the darkness like ash from some unseen fire. Clara, 28, tall and slender, with dark auburn hair tied back in a low bun, adjusted the strap of her medical bag and glanced at the path ahead. She'd taken this shortcut home from the Waverly Pines Clinic before, but never during a snow squall. The pine trees loomed on either side like frozen sentinels, the trail ahead fading under a fresh white layer. Her boots crunched the snow, steady but tired, like the rest of her. She was used to the exhaustion. 12-hour shifts at the mountain clinic had become her life. The clinic served everyone in the region, from loggers and hikers to the elderly living off-grid. Clara rarely complained, but tonight the cold wrapped around her bones more fiercely than usual. She'd barely slept the night before. A memory had returned, uninvited and cruel. The boy, the one she couldn't save during her first month at the clinic, his lips turning blue, the EKG flat, his mother screaming. It wasn't her fault, they said. The ambulance had come too late, but the image stuck, frozen in her chest like ice that never quite thawed. Her flashlight flickered against the snow-dusted trail. Up ahead, an old wooden structure caught her eye, a cabin, mostly hidden beneath snow-laden branches. She'd heard rumors about it, from locals at the diner, a forest cabin built decades ago by rangers, now abandoned. Shelter from the cold suddenly outweighed any fear of trespassing. Clara approached slowly. The door, slightly ajar, creaked with the breeze. A warmth, unexpected and real, met her as she stepped inside. The scent of pine sap and damp firewood filled the single-room space. A small iron stove glowed in one corner, fed by burning logs. She stopped short when her eyes met the figure near the fireplace. A man, perhaps in his early 70s, sat crouched beside a bundle of blankets on the floor. He was tall and wiry, with a thick gray beard and a weathered ranger's coat that looked older than she was. His face was all lines and shadows, grief etched into every furrow. This was Harold Granger. Harold had been a forest ranger for over 40 years in Waverly Pines. Locals spoke of him with quiet respect and a tinge of sadness. His son, also a ranger, had died in a wildfire 10 years ago. Since then, Harold had lived alone, retreating deeper into the woods each passing year. Some said he talked more to trees than people now. His eyes, pale blue and sharp even in the firelight, narrowed as he noticed Clara. "You're not from Fish and Wildlife," he said flatly. "No," Clara replied, gently closing the door behind her. "I'm a nurse. Clinic shift just ended. Storm hit quicker than I expected. I saw the cabin." Harold didn't answer. His focus returned to the bundle on the floor. That's when Clara saw it. A tiger cub. It was barely larger than a spaniel, maybe 4 months old, with orange fur dulled by grime and snow. Its right hind leg was twisted unnaturally, a crude cloth wrap soaked with blood around the ankle. The cub trembled, eyes wide but unafraid. There was something startlingly human in its gaze. Pain, confusion, trust. Clara dropped her bag slowly. "Where did you? Doesn't matter." Harold cut in. His voice wasn't angry, just tired. "Poachers? Illegal breeding operation down in Asheville shut down last week. This one escaped somehow. Found him yesterday near Dead Man's Hollow, limping, freezing. Couldn't leave him. Clara knelt beside the cub, her hand steady as she unwrapped the bandage. "This is infected," she murmured. Harold didn't reply. The fire cracked softly between them. "I have antibiotics," Clara said, "and a sterile pack. If you'll let me—" He hesitated, then nodded once, as she worked. Silence fell over the room. The cub didn't resist. Its breath came in shallow bursts, but it didn't flinch. Clara felt something twist inside her, the way its eyes followed her, the way it leaned into her touch, and suddenly, the memory came again, the boy in the clinic, the way his tiny hand had gone limp in hers. Clara blinked hard, focused. "Clara," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. My name. It's Clara." Harold gave a nod. Harold. They didn't speak for a while after that. When the bandage was redone and the fever began to break, Harold offered her a seat by the stove. She declined at first, then accepted, warmth overtaking stubborn pride. The fire hissed gently, and the storm outside began to swell, wind howling like the ghosts of the forest. The cub, now nestled in a wool blanket, let out a low, rasping purr. Clara reached out slowly and touched its head. "He needs a name," she said. Harold looked over. She smiled faintly. "Ash, for the color and the fire he survived," he considered, then nodded again. "Ash it is." Outside, the storm howled, but in the cabin, the nurse, the ranger, and the tiger cub settled into a silence that was, for the first time in a long while, not made of loneliness, but of quiet, shared survival. The wind had quieted by morning, leaving Waverly Pines blanketed in a muted hush. Snow coated the forest in a soft white shell, thick on the pine branches and deeper along the winding paths. From the outside, the cabin looked like part of the forest itself, hidden, forgotten. But inside, heat radiated from the iron stove and the scent of herbs, antiseptic, and wet fur lingered in the air. Clara knelt beside the bundled tiger cub on the floor. Ash was sleeping now, curled tight like a child, his breathing slow but steady. The infection had gone down slightly. She'd applied a second dose of ointment and mixed powdered antibiotics into the warm milk he drank earlier. His eyes had begun to regain a flicker of strength. She traced her fingers along the gauze on his paw, careful not to wake him. Across the room, Harold Granger sat at the wooden table, wrapping a strip of flannel around his left hand where he'd burned himself on the stove earlier that morning. His movements were precise, but not rushed, like everything else about him. He wasn't a man of wasted words or wasted time. Clara studied him quietly, beneath the layers of beard and flannel. Harold was a man carved out of loss. Every movement seemed tethered to some older pain. He caught her glance. "He's eating again," he said simply, not looking at her. "He's stronger," she replied, still watching Ash. "But he needs more than just food. This infection could have killed him." Harold leaned back in the creaking chair. "Would have died out there. You showing up changed that." Clara didn't answer. The silence in the room wasn't heavy this time, just real. "I had a son," Harold said suddenly, like the words had slipped from some place he'd buried them. "Riley. Worked with me in the service, bright, stubborn, thought he could outrun fire if he had to." Clara looked up. 10 years ago. Harold continued, eyes fixed on the window. "Lightning strike hit South Ridge. Riley and his team went in too fast. I should have called for a wider containment line, but I didn't. Figured we could cut it off before it spread." He paused, swallowed. "I sent my boy in." She felt the shift in his voice. A crack. A ghost. He didn't make it. Harold nodded once, slowly. Whole team gone. Fire turned on him, fast and cruel, just like that. He looked down at his hands. Forrest took him, and I stayed behind. The silence after that was different, deeper. Clara sat back on her heels, brushing hair from her eyes. "I lost someone too," she said, voice quiet. "A boy, just 7, my first trauma case in the clinic. He came in too late. I didn't save him." Harold met her gaze. "You were alone, I had help. But I was the one holding him when it happened." Her voice trembled. "I see him sometimes. Every time someone stops breathing." Ash stirred in his sleep, letting out a soft sound that almost resembled a whimper. Clara reached for the edge of the blanket and tucked it gently around him. "There's guilt," Harold said, after a moment. "Then there's what we do with it." She nodded slowly, unsure what to say to that. Part of her had come into this cabin just to survive the night. Now, she wasn't sure she'd ever look at it the same way. From outside, a sharp engine growl broke the calm. It was distant, on the road far below the ridge, but it brought both of them to alert. "You expecting anyone?" Clara asked. "No one comes this way," Harold said. He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the wood. She walked over beside him. Through the trees, barely visible, was a flash of red. A snowmobile, maybe hunters, she offered. Harold's eyes narrowed, or worse. They both stood in tense silence for a moment. Then, sensing the change in them, Ash let out a small growl, lifting his head and blinking drowsily. Clara turned back and knelt beside him. "Easy," she murmured. "You're safe here." But even as she said it, something unsettled had taken root in her stomach. Elsewhere, in the warm paneled office of Waverly Pines' modest town hall, Mayor Eugene Wallace clicked off the TV in irritation. He was in his early 60s, square-shouldered and barrel-chested, with a mustache that seemed to carry more authority than his title. His shirt was always pressed, tied tight to his throat, even if no one ever saw him sweat. He didn't tolerate nonsense, especially when it came to public safety. On his desk were reports, rumors of livestock gone missing, tracks found in the snow, and one unconfirmed sighting of a striped beast outside a chicken farm. Mayor Wallace tapped a pen against the desk as he addressed the two men standing before him. The first was Deputy Sheriff Tim Hardwick, a lean man with cropped blonde hair and tired gray eyes. He wasn't particularly sharp, but he was loyal and predictable. The second was Ned Greeley, a trapper and self-proclaimed wildlife expert in his 50s. Known for always smelling faintly of tobacco and fox urine, he wore a fur-lined coat over denim, and his beard looked like it had grown out of spite. "I don't care if it's a tiger, a cougar, or a flying bear," Wallace said. "The town's getting spooked, and I won't have fear snowballing into panic." "We've got 3 trail cams picking up something," Tim said. "Large, feline gait. The stripes were hard to confirm in the snow, but it's not native." Ned spat into a cup. "Escaped from one of those exotic pet farms downstate. I told you, Mayor, those places are a problem. You start letting rich folks breed wild beasts and it's just a matter of time till they end up in our woods." Wallace stood, then find it. "I'm issuing a containment order, quietly. No press, no state involvement. We track it, we trap it, and we end it before some hiker ends up in the obituaries." Tim nodded. "We'll keep it off the radio." As the men left, Wallace looked back at the camera footage, grainy stills of deep paw prints in snow. His jaw tightened. He had no idea that the so-called beast was sleeping at that very moment in a cabin less than 2 miles from town, nursed back to life by a woman no one had noticed leave the clinic last night. That afternoon, Clara stepped outside the cabin for the first time since the storm broke. The air was sharp with cold, the sky pale blue beneath lingering clouds. Snow still clung to the branches, but the wind had softened. She stood for a moment, letting the cold bite her cheeks. Her eyes wandered to the forest beyond. Behind her, Ash gave a short, hoarse mewl, an almost inquisitive sound. Clara turned. The cub had pulled himself to the edge of the blanket and was staring at her through the open doorway, his wide golden eyes calm and steady. "You're stronger already," she whispered, inside the cabin. Harold was repairing an old radio. He glanced at her, then at the horizon. "Storm's cleared," he said, "but something else is coming." Clara didn't answer. She just looked back at Ash, then up at the sky. Some wounds, she thought, don't bleed, but they still ache just as deep. The snow in Waverly Pines had begun to melt in patches, exposing blackened soil and broken pine needles beneath. The weather had shifted again, as it always did in the Appalachians, sunlight warming the land just enough to deceive, only for the chill to crawl back by night. Clara Bennett walked briskly down the gravel road leading to the edge of town, her boots sloshing through damp slush, breath forming faint clouds in the morning air. She'd left the cabin at first light. Harold had been hesitant to let her go, but they were running low on medical supplies, and Ash's leg needed more gauze and antibiotics. Besides, Clara had insisted. She would be back before sunset. She wore a long tan parka, hood lined with faux fur, and a satchel slung across her chest containing Harold's old radio, now silent but fixable, the town of Waverly Pines. A quiet pocket of civilization, wrapped in pine trees and rumor, was already murmuring with tension. At the corner store, folks spoke in hushed tones about something in the woods, and Clara could feel eyes on her as she made her way through the aisles. At the back of the store, she reached for a tin of antiseptic powder just as a tall man stepped beside her. He was in his early 40s, lean and wiry, with sun-darkened skin and a narrow face. His jacket was camo, unzipped at the collar, revealing a knife sheath at his belt. "Busy day at the clinic?" he asked, voice casual but off somehow. Clara didn't look at him. "Just picking up a few things." "Snow's melting fast," he said. "Makes it easier to track." His eyes slid toward her bag. "You out in the woods yesterday?" She turned to face him. "Why do you ask?" He smiled, but there was no warmth in it, just curious. Another man joined him, shorter, stockier, with a round face and scruffy black beard. He wore a battered bomber jacket and smelled faintly of motor oil. His name tag read Ralph, and his eyes swept Clara in a way that made her skin crawl. The first man held out a hand. "Name's Trent. That's my cousin, Ralph. We're new to town." Clara nodded stiffly but didn't shake his hand. "Welcome, I guess. We hunt," Trent added, watching her face carefully. "Mostly game, sometimes rare game." She tightened her grip on the satchel. "I'm late." They didn't follow her outside, but in the window's reflection. She saw them watching as she climbed into Harold's old pickup truck and drove off. By the time she reached the cabin, the sun was hanging low behind the ridgeline. Ash was asleep by the stove, his leg still bandaged, the edges of the wound less angry than the day before. Harold looked up from where he was cleaning his rifle. "You were followed," he said simply. Clara froze. "How do you know I've lived with trees longer than people? I know when the forest goes quiet." He gestured toward the camera on the wall, an old shoulder mount rig from his ranger days, now modified with a motion sensor. "They were here," she asked. He nodded. "Stayed far enough to not trigger it. But they'll come back. You weren't subtle." Clara's hands shook slightly as she unpacked the supplies. They knew something. One of them, Trent, kept asking questions. Harold stood and walked to the fireplace, pulling a tarp from the old trunk. Inside was a scoped hunting rifle, polished but clearly well used. He loaded it silently. "Tonight." "We don't sleep," he said. The hours passed slowly. Ash stirred restlessly around midnight, curling beside Clara's legs as she sat awake on the cot. Harold was posted by the window, eyes scanning the tree line. The snow outside glittered like salt in the moonlight. Then came the crunch, soft at first, deliberate. Harold raised a hand. Clara stayed still. Ash lifted his head and growled, a low, warning sound that hadn't come from him before. They came fast. The door was kicked open and two figures burst inside. Clara barely had time to stand before Trent was on her, grabbing her by the arm. Ralph lunged for Ash, a sack in hand. Clara screamed and shoved Trent away. His knife flashed, slicing through her coat and into her shoulder. The pain was sharp and hot. Blood bloomed against the fabric as she fell. "Get the damn thing," Trent roared. Ash, until now weak and recovering, surged forward with a snarl that echoed off the cabin walls. He threw himself in front of Clara, planting his small but powerful body between her and Trent. Ralph flinched, sack forgotten on the ground. Harold stepped out from behind the stove, rifle raised. "Drop it," he growled. Trent froze, blade still in hand. Harold fired, a single, deafening shot into the floorboards inches from his boot. The two men scrambled. Ralph tripped over the sack, crashing into the doorway. Trent grabbed his arm, dragging him into the darkness. Snow kicked up behind them as they disappeared into the trees. Harold lowered the rifle. Clara was on her knees, blood dripping from her arm. Ash stood beside her, body trembling but steady, growling until he was sure they were gone. Harold dropped beside her. "Let me see," she hissed as he peeled back the coat. "It's deep. I've got it." They worked together, as always. Ash didn't leave her side. It wasn't until later, as Clara lay bandaged, that Harold turned toward the mounted camera and rewound the last recording. The image was grainy, the angle tight, but it captured everything. The break-in, the knife. Ash's leap to protect Clara, the rifle shot. Clara watched it silently. "That'll be useful," Harold muttered. She nodded. "He protected me." Harold looked at Ash, who had returned to his blanket but hadn't taken his eyes off Clara. "He's not done healing," he said, "but he knows who he belongs to now." Outside, snow began to fall again, light this time, soft as feathers. In the cabin, blood had been spilled, but so had something deeper, loyalty. The sirens pierced the stillness of Waverly Pines like a scream in a church. Snow slushed beneath the spinning tires of the ambulance as it careened up the mountain path, its light strobing against the trees. Inside, Clara Bennett lay strapped to a stretcher, her jacket soaked with blood at the shoulder. Her face was pale, lips parted slightly as if caught mid-breath. Every bump in the road jarred her frame. The paramedic beside her, a wiry, sharp-featured woman named Lana Reese, monitored her vitals with practiced focus. Lana was in her early 40s, olive-skinned with crow's feet etched around her dark eyes. A woman who had spent 2 decades tending wounds others couldn't stomach. She never panicked, not even when death brushed its fingers close. But Clara's stats were dropping, fast. "BP is 60/40, she said into her radio. "Pulse weak. Patient is unresponsive. Probable hypovolemic shock. ETA 6 minutes." Back at the cabin, Harold watched the red and white lights vanish through the pines. Ash sat beside him on the porch, his tail twitching slowly across the wooden boards. The tiger cub had stopped growling hours ago, but his body stayed tense. Ears pointed toward the road long after the ambulance had gone. Harold's face was granite. He held the SD card from the cabin's mounted camera between his thumb and forefinger like a tiny truth he wasn't sure what to do with. Waverly Pines General Hospital was small but sturdy. 3 floors, 1 trauma bay, and a row of windows that overlooked the frozen town square. Clara was wheeled in through the emergency doors and taken straight into surgery. The attending physician, Dr. Kenneth Doyle, was a man in his late 50s with a thin silver beard and hands that had seen hundreds of miracles and failures. "She's critical," he said, glancing at the wound. "Get me O negative. Call the OR. We're not losing her." News traveled fast in small towns, and rumors traveled faster. By the time the second unit of blood was hooked into Clara's arm, people were whispering. First responders had seen something about a tiger, about Clara shielding it, about a gunshot. Then came the video. Harold uploaded the footage from his cabin's camera with a 1-sentence caption. "This is what really happened." By mid-morning, it had gone viral, on screen. The grainy image showed Clara shielding Ash, the flash of the knife, the tiger lunging between them with surprising strength. Then Harold's warning shot, the men fleeing into the night. The internet did what it always did, judge fast and without mercy. But this time, it judged in favor of the wounded. Not the wounded girl, not even the wounded tiger, but the wounded truth. Within hours, animal rights groups began calling the town office. People from surrounding counties packed bags. Some brought flowers, some brought petitions. Some simply came to see the girl and the tiger they had watched through their screens. Among them was Logan Hunt, a 7-year-old boy who had barely spoken since his father, a firefighter, died in a blaze the year before. He lived with his mother in a house just off Main Street. Logan was small for his age, with soft brown hair and anxious hazel eyes that never quite settled. He rarely left his room, but the morning after the video broke, he picked up a box of crayons and began to draw. He drew Clara, curled on the ground, with Ash crouched over her like a living shield. In his drawing, Ash's eyes glowed bright yellow, and Clara smiled despite the blood. He didn't say anything when he finished, just stood, took a piece of tape, and walked with his mother to the hospital. His mother, Janine Hunt. A tired-looking woman with streaks of gray in her bun and quiet sadness in her voice, stood beside him as he taped the picture to the main gate. By noon, it was surrounded by candles, hand-drawn hearts, and sticky notes scribbled with words like "hero," "thank you," and "let him live." Mayor Wallace was not happy. He sat behind his desk at Town Hall, rubbing his temple with 2 fingers. The video had been forwarded to his inbox a dozen times. So had the complaints. The problem wasn't just the tiger anymore, it was the symbol the tiger had become. "This is spiraling," he muttered. "Into what?" asked Grace Redmond, the town's only legal advisor. A whip-smart woman in her 30s with cropped black hair, thin glasses, and a wardrobe that never deviated from gray. Into truth, Wallace's lips thinned. Into a circus. Grace folded her arms. She was stabbed protecting a creature that didn't attack anyone. That video is evidence of both illegal trespassing and attempted theft. Wallace stood up, walking to the window where the crowd was beginning to grow. People held signs. Some knelt by the gate. Others were just waiting. He saw a man in a veteran's cap, a girl with blue hair, a mother rocking a baby. He sighed. "Where's the animal now?" Grace looked up from her phone, still with Harold Granger. "He's not answering calls." Wallace ran a hand through his hair. "Tell the sheriff to stand down. No more pursuit orders until I say otherwise." At the hospital, Clara stirred. She awoke to the steady beep of monitors and the faint smell of iodine. Her arm was bandaged, IV lines snaked into her veins. Angela, one of the nurses she'd trained with, sat beside her, teary-eyed. "You're back," Angela whispered. Clara blinked slowly. "Ash, still safe," Angela said, "and the whole town knows now." Clara tried to sit up but winced. Angela handed her a tablet. "You need to see this." It took a moment for her to focus, but when she saw the video, the exact moment Ash shielded her, something inside her cracked open. Not from pain, from release. She scrolled, saw Logan's drawing, saw the hundreds of comments. "Let him live. They saved each other. Ash for ambassador, a tiger with a soul." That evening, the crowd outside had tripled. Logan returned, standing at the gate in a red wool hat, holding his mother's hand. His eyes were wide, but calmer now. People had begun calling the picture the boy's banner. Even reporters had started to arrive. Harold appeared just before sunset, Ash walking beside him on a loose harness. The cub's fur had grown fuller, his limp almost gone. When he approached the gate, a hush fell. Ash looked at Logan. The boy stepped forward, lifted a small stuffed animal, another tiger, and handed it through the bars. Ash leaned down and sniffed it gently. The town exhaled. The light came first, warm and slanted through the hospital blinds, painting golden stripes across the room's pale blue walls. It was the light of early morning in Waverly Pines, quiet, clean, and heavy with frost. Clara Bennett blinked awake slowly, her eyes adjusting, her breath shallow, for a moment. She didn't remember where she was. Then she saw him. Harold Granger sat beside her bed, his frame hunched forward in the hard plastic chair, both hands gently resting on the broad forehead of the tiger cub curled beneath him. Ash was half asleep, his head rising and falling on Harold's worn hiking boots, his body now visibly stronger, the coat fuller. Clara watched the old man whisper something into the cub's ear. She couldn't hear the words, but the tenderness in his voice caught in her chest like a hook. Harold looked up and saw her watching. He smiled, just barely. "Morning, sunshine," he rasped. She tried to smile, though her lips still ached. "How long have you been here?" Harold stretched his back, joints cracking. "Since they wheeled you out of surgery. Figured you'd open those eyes, eventually. Ash wouldn't let me leave anyway." Ash stirred at the sound of her voice and rose to his paws, padding over to her bedside. His golden eyes met hers. He pressed his head softly against her uninjured arm and let out a small, rasping sound, a cross between a purr and a sigh. Clara reached out and touched his fur, which was no longer patchy or dull, but rich and warm. Her fingers sank into the softness, and for a second, she forgot about the scar on her shoulder, the pain in her side, and the sting of too many memories. Outside the hospital window, a crowd had gathered again, dozens at first light, now nearly 100. Some brought thermoses of coffee and stood in quiet clusters. Others knelt before Logan's drawing, which now had candles and ribbons around it. The words, "Let Ash live," had been chalked across the sidewalk. The decision had come hours earlier, whispered through town hall and confirmed by the governor's office. Mayor Wallace, under mounting pressure and bolstered by legal advice, had called an emergency session with state wildlife officials. The verdict: Ash would not be euthanized, relocated to a cage, or returned to any facility. He would be granted sanctuary status and transferred to the Black Fern National Preserve, a 1,200-acre protected forest 3 hours north. The only condition: Harold Granger would oversee his integration. As a registered former ranger with experience in exotic wildlife handling, he would be allowed to stay on site indefinitely as a volunteer wildlife handler. And Clara. She hadn't been told yet, not officially, but the invitation was waiting on her nightstand, typed, signed, and sealed in a pale blue envelope with the state seal on the corner. The same morning, just after breakfast trays were collected, Clara received a knock on her hospital door. A nurse pushed it open, revealing a small woman with gentle eyes and slightly hunched posture. Her name was Janine Hunt, and she carried a manila envelope in both hands. She stepped forward slowly, dressed in a forest green sweater and brown boots dusted with dried leaves. Her graying hair was pulled into a careful bun, and her face had the tired lines of a woman who'd spent more nights worried than resting. "I'm Logan's mom," she said softly. Clara sat up straighter, heart catching. "The boy who drew the picture." Janine nodded, placing the envelope on the side table. "He hasn't spoken to anyone outside our house in almost a year. He started therapy after his father died, but it never clicked. Then he saw the video, saw you, saw Ash." Clara was quiet, overwhelmed. Janine's eyes misted. "He talks now." "Not a lot. But yesterday. He asked if tigers can remember people. Then he said your name." Clara reached for the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter written in green crayon. The spelling was shaky, but the words were clear. "Thank you for saving him. I think he saved you too. I hope you're not scared anymore. Love, Logan." Her vision blurred. She placed the letter over her chest and leaned back. Janine placed a hand on hers and gave it a gentle squeeze before quietly exiting. By midday, reporters began arriving from out of town. News vans parked along the main street. Footage of Clara waving faintly through her hospital window appeared on the evening broadcast. People called her the Tiger Nurse, the guardian of Waverly Pines, and the woman he chose. But Clara ignored the noise. She met with a state official named Marla Dean, a tall woman in a Forest Service blazer with firm handshakes and a clipboard always within reach. Marla laid out the terms. Clara would serve as medical coordinator for the preserve's Animal Rescue Division. She'd have housing on site, a team under her, and time each day with Ash during his rewilding process. "We know he's not a domestic pet," Marla explained, "but he also isn't ready to survive in the full wild. He needs a place in between. You two, you're that place." Clara said yes. Harold didn't need to be asked. He was already packing. 2 weeks later, on a frost-tipped morning, the hospital discharged Clara. She wore a thick coat and a sling for her healing arm. As she exited the main doors, she was greeted by more than 100 people in the courtyard, cheering softly, respectfully, holding handmade signs. In the center stood Logan, holding his mother's hand, wearing a tiger print scarf and the same red wool hat. He stepped forward, shy but brave. Clara knelt with effort, and Logan wrapped his arms around her carefully, like something precious might break. Behind them, Ash stood on all fours in the snow beside Harold, a harness still buckled loosely around his shoulders. He watched the hug, and though he didn't understand human words, he stepped forward and nudged Logan gently with his forehead. Later that afternoon, as the transport vehicle rolled into the Black Fern Preserve, Clara looked out over the forest. Pines stretched high and steady, their shadows long across the snow, a sanctuary not just for the wild, but for the wounded. Ash jumped lightly from the truck bed and looked back at her. She followed, hand in paw, heart stitched back together. They walked into the trees, and somewhere between what was lost and what could never be forgotten, a promise lived that even in the coldest forest, warmth would find a way. Sometimes, God's miracles don't come with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes, they come wrapped in fur, in silence, in the quiet protection of a wounded cub. Clara thought she was saving Ash, but in truth, Ash saved her. He reminded her, and all of us, that love, Loyalty and courage are not limited to humans. They are gifts from above, sewn into the fabric of creation. When a town stood still, when a child found his voice, and when an old man dared to hope again, we saw more than just a rescue. We witnessed what happens when people choose compassion over fear. Maybe you felt like Ash, unwanted, misunderstood. Or maybe like Clara, trying to heal while quietly hurting. No matter where you are on your journey, remember this: God has not forgotten you. His grace often arrives when we least expect it, through strangers, through pain, and yes, even through the paws of a tiger. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to leave a comment below sharing what it meant to you. Type Amen if you believe in second chances and unseen miracles. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us of faith, love, and hope, and may God bless you and your family with peace, healing, and the courage to protect what is good. Amen.